It's Wednesday here on the North Shore Drive podcast. The Steelers are back at OTAs, and so are we here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter with Ray Fittipaldo. We'll be breaking down things we're talking about, especially on the tight end position. Can Pat Freiermuth take the step up this year, along with Darnell Washington, Connor Heyward, and also Hot Rod Rodney Williams? We'll talk about that and the overall offense and how it's looking with Arthur Smith, as well as talking some Pirates talk with Noah Hiles, all here in the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo, one of our great Steelers beat writers. And as always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our Pittsburgh sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And also, as always, the show is brought to you by the best bar in all of Pittsburgh, and that's Mike's Beer Bar, right on the North Shore, right across the street from PNC Park on Federal Street. You can find Mike's Beer Bar with over 500 different available beers. 300 of those beers are from the local Pittsburgh area, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap, and they're always switching new ones in and out. So every time you go there, you're getting a new experience in all the different types of beers that you can get there. Go to Mike's Beer Bar today. More on them later. Ray, we had Monday off with the Memorial Day holiday, so we got a chance to kind of take a break, but the Steelers were back at it on Tuesday. We were there, and I think there's a bit of excitement around different levels of the offense for what Arthur Smith could mean for it. We've talked about a lot about how the running game is going to be impacted by it. Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren as a 1-2 punch, how the offensive line could feed off of it, and how the wide receiver position could be interesting, and who's going to be the number 2 wide receiver. But we haven't touched a whole lot on the tight end position, and Pat Freiermuth is one who is going to get a lot of attention this year as far as will he be that guy? Because like Najee Harris, he's in a contract year. Both of them have been in the league for 3 years. They got 1 year left on their rookie deal. Najee Harris hasn't given the 5th-year extension. So I look at this, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how does Pat Freiermuth get more included in the Arthur Smith offense than he was in the Matt Canada offense. How do you think that shakes out as far as what might help him to earn his keep with the Steelers?
Yeah, it's interesting, Chris. A lot of people were fretting about the Steelers' number 2 receiver, but in reality, could that be Pat Freiermuth, especially knowing the way that Arthur Smith has liked to utilize his tight ends in the past? So, I think certainly he could be in for a nice little season. I go back to his rookie season with Ben Roethlisberger, super productive in the red zone. And he was a guy that they counted on as a rookie. And then because of circumstances and injuries, that production steadily declined the last 2 seasons. I think the biggest reason for that, quite honestly, was the offensive coordinator and was the quarterback position. And if you get more competent quarterback play from Russell Wilson, and I think it's obvious that you're going to get a more competent offensive structure under Arthur Smith than you had under Canada, then I think it's only reasonable to think that production from Freiermuth is going to shoot back up again. So, 7 touchdowns as a rookie, I could see him matching that, maybe even going over that this year. And, if that number 2 receiver position doesn't get addressed, I could see Freiermuth up around, 800 yards or so, maybe even 900 if he stays healthy. So this is a huge year for Pat Freiermuth. Obviously a contract year. We'll see if they get something done with him before training camp, but he certainly has a big chance to be a big part of this offense.
I agree. He has a big chance here. And part of, like you said, it wasn't just the yards, it was the red zone production. And he stepped in huge in his rookie season in 2021. Both him and Najee Harris stepped in huge. Without the 2 of them, they don't make the playoffs that year. Like you think back to some of the big catches he made against the one-hander he had against the Browns in his rookie season in a very tight game that they lose that game, they're out the playoffs. And Najee Harris had impact as well. But then you even look back to the next year where he didn't have as many touchdowns, but he had over 700 yards receiving in his second year in the NFL. And last year did take a dip, like you said. Injuries also played a role there. He only had 308 yards and only 2 touchdowns. But as we both agree, like that Canada, the system was limited. The quarterback play itself was limited. There wasn't as much production to look there. Now, I think a big question will come from a lot of people about, hey, so I get it that Arthur Smith and he's a different coordinator, but what about his time with Kyle Pitts and the Falcons? Because Kyle Pitts was a top 10 pick for the Falcons back in 2021. In fact, the 4th overall pick. In fact, he was the only tight end selected higher than Pat Freiermuth in that draft class. And whereas his first year, he burst onto the scene with 1,026 receiving yards, but only 1 touchdown. But since then, he only had 356 yards in his second year, 667 yards in his third year, and he hasn't had more than 3 touchdowns in a season. So people might say, does Arthur Smith actually know how to use tight ends when he had, such a highly drafted one like Kyle Pitts and he didn't put up major numbers? And I think, like, look, there's reason to look at that and think, okay, there's part of that. But again, I point to looking at not just what he did as a head coach, but look at what he did as a coordinator. The last time he was an offensive coordinator, and the last time he was an offensive coordinator, there was a tight end by the name of Jonnu Smith who got 41 passes for 448 yards and caught 8 touchdowns. And that right there, if Pat Freiermuth does that, he's getting a contract extension for the Steelers, and he's getting a lot more recognition in the NFL for what he's able to do.
Yeah, and how much of Kyle Pitts' lack of production, quite frankly, came from the unstable quarterback situation with the Falcons, right? I mean, they were kind of in a similar situation with the Steelers. That 2021 draft class also produced Desmond Ridder, and he wasn't much better than Kenny Pickett was. So there were certainly some struggles there. But yeah, to your point, was when he was with Tennessee, they didn't have like a big name type of a tight end, but they've had guys who were always productive. And quite frankly, he's had 2 guys in his Tennessee tenure. It was always kind of a double-edged sword there. You could have, one guy maybe get like 500 yards, the other guy gets 600 yards, and they were both productive in the passing game. So I think he likes to use all of his tight ends. If you want to break it down beyond Pat Freiermuth, who's going to be that second guy for the Steelers?
Yeah.
Is it going to be Cam Heyward? I don't think it's going to be Darnell Washington, just because I don't think that he has that skill set. Could it be McCoy Pruitt? I know he's coming off a quiet season. So, if and that's a big if the offense is structured in a similar way, I think there's going to be opportunities for that number 2 tight end. And I'm not sure who that's going to be for the Steelers right now, to be honest with you, Chris.
It's a good question, because look, Darnell Washington, like, there's a lot of people that are excited about what he could do. Remember, he was a much talked about late 3rd round pick for the Steelers last year. And he has amazing size and he has awesome athleticism, but he hasn't shown the prowess to be a pure route runner like the way Pat Freiermuth is. Now, he can block his butt off, he can destroy people at the line of scrimmage, but as far as being a receiving threat, like you're talking about, yeah, he is kind of limited there. And I think that there's reasonable kind of questions about what can happen behind Pat Freiermuth, but between Connor Heyward, between him, and there's also Rodney Hot Rod Williams, who turned heads. We all talked about him in training camp. Like, man, that's a tough guy to keep off the team, and they kind of were able to keep him on the practice squad. Now he's back this year. I think the Steelers have a chance to find a way to use, even if Darnell Washington isn't he's not going to be anything like Pat Freiermuth or Travis Kelce, or like the guys that go out and make ridiculous routes. But there were times last year, and you saw some of the games, Ray, where he didn't run a complicated route. He just ran a seam up the middle or ran to the flat, and he was just wide open. And a guy that's 6'7" and 260 and runs like a 4.5, like a guy that with his athleticism, you just get him in space and just let him run forward, he's gonna get you 5, 6, 7, 10 yards sometimes. Yeah. Because teams can't sometimes overlook the second tight end on the field. So I think if the Steelers just get that out of Darnell Washington, that can also be something that helps open up the rest of the offense.
Yeah, I think you also have to consider, is Connor Heyward going to be an H-back type of player?
Right.
How does Cordero Patterson fit into this, running back out of the backfield? He certainly could be a part of that as well. So they're going to have versatile players in different positions on this offense, and they're all going to have a chance to contribute at some point. But to your bigger point, yes, the tight ends can, and I think they will have a nice part of this offense here in 2024.
Absolutely. I want to talk more about this offense and particularly how Arthur Smith is kind of laying the groundwork in his first OTAs as offensive coordinator. More on that on the North Shore Drive podcast. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you, this show is brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. When you go to Mike's Beer Bar, it's on Federal Street, right across the street from PNC Park. You go there, and it's an amazing place. They have over 20 televisions, so you can catch whatever sporting events you want. It's great for before, during, and after Pirates games. It's an awesome place where they have over 500 different available beers. 300 of those beers are for the local Pittsburgh area with all the amazing craft breweries that we have around this town. And 80 of those local beers are available on tap. They're always switching new ones in and out. So every time you go, you get a brand new experience. Mike's Beer Bar is literally the best bar in Pittsburgh. When you go there, they also have amazing food like Steak on a Stone, where you could choose your choice cut of steak. It's brought to you on a heated stone. Every time you cut off a piece, you press that piece into the stone and you choose how well done you want every single bite of your steak, all while you're enjoying the best selection of beer in town. It's Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. Go there today. And when you get there, tell them Chris sent you. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk a little bit more about Arthur Smith, because we talked about a lot about Pat Freiermuth there. But one thing I think we continue to hear, and we heard this more from Isaac Seumalo, is that there's a sense of consistency, a sense of, set expectations that people are seeing and understanding in these early practices. And this doesn't mean that the Steelers are about the number one offense, and that no one's saying anything like that. But there is a different level of a foundation that Arthur Smith seems to be setting in OTAs than what Matt Canada was able to set. And I think at least that is a good sign for what the Steelers need to see different in this offense moving forward.
Yeah, and one other word that Seumalo used, accountability. So I don't know if that was a veiled shot at what was going on last year. Listen, Najee Harris said his piece at the end of last season about having some changes need to be made. And, I think anytime you have a new offensive coaching staff come in, and it's not just Arthur Smith, you have a new receivers coach, you have a new quarterbacks coach, those guys are going to want to set the ground rules early, set the expectations early, so these players have a great idea of what they're going to need to be successful going forward. So I was in on that Seumalo interview session there, and that kind of stood out to me. I think maybe there was some of that missing last season. We all know it was missing from the receivers corps, but maybe it was missing in other places as well.
Maybe, and I think that's part of the question here is what changes about the offense. We talked about Zach Azzani, the new receivers coach, and how he seems very energetic in how he's been engaging with not just George Pickens, but Calvin Austin and every single receiver there in the Steelers roster right now. But the Steelers also kept guys like Alfredo Rivero, the tight ends coach, Pat Meyer, the offensive line coach, and Eddie Faulkner, the running backs coach. I think that they were a sense that, look, you got some of the right position coaches. You just needed someone to set the table and set the schedule for the week at a better pace. And, something that I think we could both kind of acknowledge, at least the structure of what the offense is working on seems at a more rigid pace and a more directional pace. And it's been interesting to see them clash with the defense in some of these practices. We can't say everything we're seeing, but at least from what we've gotten from some of the players we've talked to, I think the offense is having more success in the 11 on 11 and 7 on 7 drills that they're working against this defense when we talk to these guys. And granted, again, it's just football in shorts. It's not saying that this offense is some light years away, past where they were last year, but again, the whole point was they needed to set a better foundation, have a better start to things than what they've had the last several years on offense. And at least when you talk to guys like Russell Wilson, Seumalo, guys who were here last year, and even other guys who've been here longer, it does seem like there is a different pace to things.
Yeah, and how about the buy-in from a guy like Russell Wilson, who is entering year 13 in the NFL, but he has been present at every OTA session, and he was present in phase 1 as well. So I think, that's a big part of it. You talk about the success of the offense going up against the defense. You have a new quarterback who is invested and who's done come in here and done everything he can to ensure that this offense does get off to a good start this coming season. Now, listen, you're right. It's football in shorts. No Steelers fan has to be reminded about anything that goes on in training camp in the preseason and how that relates to the regular season, because we saw it last year. How good did he look in Latrobe? How
unstoppable
good did he look in those preseason games? And then you flip the switch to the regular season. Teams are actually game planning for you. They're trying to stop you every single play, and it's just a different animal. So, yeah, we could certainly glean some things from these OTAs here in the next couple of weeks, and also in training camp as well. But really, Chris, we're not going to know about this offense in its totality until the regular season gets here.
Absolutely. I do think that there's a lot to break down as far as what Arthur Smith can bring to the table schematically. But I think, again, a big part of what was the problem with Matt Canada, and we find this out more and more as we talk to players and they say what's different, is that just the day-to-day schedule, the weekly schedule, and building off of what you worked on the day before. Those are the things that I think Arthur Smith is helping this offense get on pace for, because that is so important to how teams grow, right? It's understanding, like, hey, we need to work on this concept, and why are we working on this concept? So that we can open up this concept. And then during the season, when you've built up the entire playbook and you're more confident about the different concepts and why certain concepts play off of each other, like, play sequencing, you're setting up the play action with the run and setting up the run with the pass, and vice versa. When then you have all that in your back pocket, and then in the season you're like, hey, at the start of the week, guess what? We're reviewing the tape on this team. We know these are their weaknesses. This is how we want to attack them. When we go against them, this is how we attack them again. And you take them even when Matt Canada was first gone. That first game against the Bengals, they went after the Bengals, and this was when Eddie Faulkner and Mike Sullivan were the offensive coordinators, and Eddie Faulkner was the one setting the week-long pace of things. What did they do in that first Bengals game? They went after them with Pat Freiermuth, attacked the middle of the field, and Pat Freiermuth had a career game with 122 passing yards. And what did they do to the Bengals in the second game? They used Pat Freiermuth as a decoy, and he didn't even get a single target in the game, and the offense shredded them for 30-plus points in a game that they had to win. And so it's those types of things that only started to happen when Matt Canada was gone last year, that I think that if Arthur Smith and if he sets this good foundation now in OTAs and that leads to training camp, those might be things that you see regularly part of the Steelers offense when the season gets going this upcoming year.
Yeah, and one additional point about the schematics, Chris, if the receivers, let's say Calvin Austin or George Pickens has a question, hey, why are we doing this way? They can go to Scotty Miller or Van Jefferson and say, hey, wait, Van Jefferson says this is why we do this. That's how this works. And, the tight ends can go to McCoy Pruitt, and the running backs can go to Cordero Patterson. Offer zone with some veterans who have been on Arthur Smith's teams in the past, who kind of know how he operates and why he does things a certain way. So I don't know that all those guys are going to be on the 53-man roster come September, but it's certainly nice to have them around in May, June, July, and August, so they can sort of set the tone for the offense and help those young guys, those holdovers from the previous staff, get to know and to learn his offense.
Absolutely. We'll keep you up to date with this all throughout the rest of the offseason as OTAs continue. We'll be at the facility today and tomorrow for OTAs. And I think next week is the final week of OTAs. And then the week after that is mini camp before the Steelers take their long, big break before training camp. But we'll keep you up to date with all of that here at the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Ray, thanks so much for joining us. We got Noah Hiles talking baseball next here on the North Shore Drive podcast. We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter here with my old buddy on the pit beat, Noah Hiles, who's in Detroit. He's been to Comerica Park. He's been testing out the ballpark food there as the Pirates get ready to take on the Tigers. There was a rain delay yesterday, or not a rain delay, a postponement. So now there is a doubleheader. And Noah, you'll get to see the two most talked about pitchers on the Pirates roster in back-to-back games. That's got to be exciting.
Yeah, Chris. Well, first things first, I'm glad you called it a postponement because there was no rain. It's a game delayed due to weather that never showed up.
Wow.
So yeah, but regardless, this crazy postponement leads to what I think is probably the most exciting doubleheader the Pirates have played in a very long time. I mean, you could think back, there have been some doubleheaders in the competitive years from 13 to 15, where, they had the Cardinals in town, or maybe the Brewers or somebody, where they were fighting for position placing. But as far as individual interest, having Jared Jones and Paul Skenes pitch on the same day, that's as great as it gets. With Skubal opposing Jones in game one of the best pitchers in the American League, this is appointment television for baseball fans. I've had a lot of people on Twitter, reach out and say, hey, I'm calling off work. I might come up to the ballpark, or at least I'm going to sit around and watch it all day. It's going to be a fun one. These two guys are appointment television, and when you put them back to back in the same day, it's going to be something special, and I'm excited to cover it and document it.
Certainly. And I also think the Pirates, you could say they've been playing better of late. They've won 6 of their last 10, 6-4. And while that's not going to, break any records or get them, back in, in the contention for the top of the division, it does kind of stop the bleeding that had been happening, that kind of dropped them out of being, where they started at the top of the season, at the top of the division, to being last in the division. And right now they're 4th in the NL Central, just ahead of the Reds, barely. They're a game and a half back from the Cardinals, 6 games out of first place. But Noah, I can also say we can see that there's more offense coming from the Pirates right now. Though they lost 8-1 to the Braves, they beat them 4-1 the game before, 11-5 the game before that. They scored 6 and 5 runs again in their 2 losses to the Giants, while coming with a late comeback last week, 7-6 in their 1 win over the Giants. What is different, if anything, about how the Pirates are approaching the plate, or is just this the law of averages coming back around?
I think it's a little bit of both, Chris. First things first, yes, I do think it's a little bit of the law of averages, where when your whole team slumps at one point in the season, things are going to happen in order for that to stop. In some cases, it means guys get demoted, like Henry Davis or Jack Sawinski. In other cases, it means guys get promoted, like Nick Gonzalez and G1 Bay. And in the third part of it is just guys are getting either luckier, or it's just coming around. A guy like Andrew McCutchen would have 13 home runs